Mr. Keating is about 3 minutes out. As soon as he arrives, we will start this hearing. The Subcommittee on Europe of the House Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The Chair would like to remind our guests today that demonstrations from the audience, including the use of signs and placards, as well as verbal outbursts, are a violation of the rules of the House. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the Alexander Lukashenko authoritarian repression in Belarus and the brave efforts of Belarus's democratic forces in standing up to this dictatorship. We will also discuss Lukashenko's complicity in Russia's war in Ukraine. I'd also like to welcome, for the first time, Representative Gabe Amo to the Subcommittee on Europe. This is Mr. Amo's first hearing with the subcommittee, and I look forward to his participation at future subcommittee events and meetings. I would also like to welcome the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, who is joining us today. He will participate following all other members in today's hearing. I now will recognize myself for an opening statement. Alexander Lukashenko is an illegitimate dictator. The fraudulent 2020 Belarusian presidential election made a mockery of democracy. His regime has beaten and imprisoned peaceful protesters, as well as journalists, including Ihar Losik and Andrei Kuznetsky from the Radio Free Europe. As we speak, Lukashenko holds nearly 1,500 political prisoners behind bars. Lukashenko also undermines Belarusian sovereignty by furthering the so-called union state with Russia. He's making Belarus a permanent junior partner to the Kremlin. Belarusian culture is also under attack by the regime and its enablers. Use of the Belarusian language is gradually being replaced by Russian. National symbols, such as the red and white flag, independent Belarus, are banned. Vladimir Putin already considers Belarus and its people to be part of Russia. In a speech last month, Putin referred to Belarus, as well as Ukraine, as part of a historic Russian nation. This revisionism is legitimized by allowing Russia to use Belarusian territory to wage its unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. The U.S. must continue to support the democratic development of Belarus. I applaud the bravery of leaders like Ms. Tsikhanouskaya for their efforts to fight tyranny, even from exile. Belarus has served as a launchpad for Russia's full-scale invasion, provided Russia with ammunition, and hosted Russian nuclear weapons. In addition to these measures, the Lukashenko regime's weaponization of refugees by illegally funneling them en masse to the borders of Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, as well as the support for the Wagner Group and increasing integration with Kremlin, also presents a threat to NATO. Most egregiously, Lukashenko has made Belarus an active participant in crimes against abducted Ukrainian children, holding thousands of them in facilities in Belarus for so-called re-education. The international community must hold all levels of Lukashenko's regime accountable for these crimes, alongside his sponsor, Vladimir Putin. I applaud U.S. engagement with the democratic forces of Belarus, as well as the sanctions imposed on Lukashenko, his regime, and enablers in response to the domestic crackdowns and support of Russia's war in Ukraine. However, more can be done. Since June 2022, we have not had a special envoy to Belarus. The Biden administration needs to fix this immediately. The U.S. and our allies must also strengthen our sanctions to make the cost of continued subjugation of the Belarusian people to Lukashenko's repression and Vladimir Putin's imperial ambitions too high. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today how U.S. assistance can better be directed and what we can do to increase the pressure on Lukashenko and his master, Vladimir Putin. The Chair now recognizes Ranking Member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for any statements that he may have.
Thank you, Chairman Keane, for holding this important hearing today on the future and freedom and democracy of Belarus. The presidential elections in August 2020 in Belarus marked a new chapter in the country's history. Prior to the elections, a group of strong, determined, mostly women, leaders led hundreds of thousands of protesters in the streets of Minsk and other cities in Belarus, demanding a better future. Those in the streets were not only protesting the brutal and authoritarian crackdown of Alexander Lukashenko, who's ruled Belarus through multiple fraudulent elections, but they were advocating for the protection of their civil and human rights, freedom of speech and assembly, and the maintenance of the rule of law, tenets of any democracy. In response to the unprecedented scale and scope of these protests against the rule Lukashenko forcefully arrested, beat, detained hundreds, if not thousands, of peaceful protesters. He arrested not just the political opposition, but journalists and other people simply chanting for freedom or wearing red and white, the colors of the opposition. Over the last 3 years since the protests took place, Lukashenko's crackdown has only intensified, and he and his security services have stifled all dissent inside Belarus. Today, over 1,400 political prisoners remain in Belarus, including the leaders like the husband of our witness, Sergei Tsikhanouskaya, Maria Kolesnikova, and others like journalist Ihar Losik. All people we remember along with the others who are being held here, held today as we conduct this hearing. Lukashenko has also extended his repression to Belarusians living outside the country. In 2022, Lukashenko amended the criminal code to allow for trial in absentia against citizens abroad, and in January 23, a law was passed to enable authorities to revoke citizenship for Belarusians living abroad. At the same time, Lukashenko has been woefully complicit in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, assisting authorities in the trafficking of Ukrainian children and allowing Russian forces to use Belarusian territory as a staging ground for its illegal invasion. In response to Lukashenko's crackdown at home and support for Russia's war, the United States, in concert with our European allies, has acted forcefully to impose costs on the regime. As of December 1st of this year, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on 111 individuals and 81 entities engaged in human rights abuses, electoral fraud, corruption, including major financial, petrochemical, potash, manufacturing, state-owned companies who benefit from the regime's repression, an extensive amount of sanctions. An additional 500 Belarusian officials have been banned from entering the United States or had their U.S. visas suspended or revoked. Congress has also acted, passing my resolution in the 117th Congress, H.R. 124, supporting the people of Belarus and the democratic aspirations of that country. This Congress and I and other co-chairs in the House Belarusian caucus have introduced H.Res. 441, which in addition calls for the release of all political prisoners in Belarus. Congress has also appropriated $30 million in supporting civil society and democratic opposition in Belarus. Money, I believe strongly, must be included in any upcoming appropriations package. We welcome to this committee the leader of the Belarusian opposition, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, to shine a spotlight on the progress the Belarusian opposition has made towards our democratic future. For example, the Democratic opposition has established a united transitional cabinet and a coordination council, two bodies dedicated to understanding the needs of Belarusians inside and outside the country and advocating for effective policy to meet these needs. Such legislative and executive bodies are vital to the future of democracy in Belarus. Ultimately, united and committed opposition with a deep knowledge of the foundation of a democratic system will only serve to benefit the people of Belarus. At the same time, today's hearing comes just as the inaugural U.S.-Belarus strategic dialogue with the Democratic opposition occurs. This dialogue, which will focus on support for the opposition and furthering accountability measures for the regime, is a significant step in demonstrating the United States' long-term support for the Democratic opposition. I'm hopeful that additional accountability measures from Lukashenko's regime will be announced in the coming days. 3 years into this movement, I remain optimistic that despite the repression in Belarus, hope remains amongst those in exile, the diaspora, and those inside the country with a brighter, more democratic future. That hope is why we're here for this committee hearing today, and we hope that across the world, support for Belarus continues to amplify those strong voices, those opposition voices led by our witness here today. Today's hearing is another step towards these goals. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Smith for 5 minutes of opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kane and Bill Keating. Thank you, the ranking member. Tom, I want to thank you for calling this very important and timely hearing, for your leadership and that as well as the ranking member. It is deeply appreciated by the Belarusians, but by every one of us who follow this closely. Thank you so much. This hearing, of course, is on the future of freedom and democracy in Belarus, and it is an honor and a high honor and a distinct pleasure to hear from Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, the leader of the free Belarusians everywhere. She has earned this position by showing enormous courage and principle, and many of us, and I believe it beyond any reasonable doubt, she won the election. It was stolen by Lukashenko, so we are talking to the government, should be the government leader of Belarus. So thank you for not only being on the ballot, but being such a tenacious campaigner. And of course, we remember and we pray for not only you, but your husband and the other political prisoners, but your husband, Sergei, for the terrible harshness that he has faced in this long, terrible prison sentence meted out by Lukashenko. Your patriotic sacrifice that you were making for your country, you will be remembered forever by the Belarusians and by all who believe in human rights and democracy. You represent millions of Belarusians who suffer under an ever-worsening terror campaign by Lukashenko. We know what he has done in partnering with Putin to invade Ukraine, and all of the terrible enabling that he has done, when they lied so in a bold-faced way that they were just doing maneuvers and having war games, all the while preparing for a terrible, unprovoked invasion. Lukashenko, I believe, is guilty of war crimes, and he needs to be held to account by the ICC and any other court that will take this up. He ought to be, along with Putin, named for any kind of indictment for what he has done. I met with Lukashenko in 2017. As I think you know, in 2004, I was the author of the Belarus Democracy Act and did the updates and expansions in 2006, 2012, and then working with my good friend and colleague Bill Keating, we expanded it in 2020. And Lukashenko, at a meeting, I was barred from going there until the OSCE had a parliamentary assembly in Lithuania, and 11 of us traveled over to meet with him and to argue with him, and he called me public enemy number one, big deal. I leave the country. You and all of your fellow Belarusians go to jail, not you, but your husband, for being such stalwart believers in freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental human rights. I am circulating to the other members the Belarus Democracy Act and Human Rights and Sovereignty Act of 2023, which we hope to move as quickly as we can. He won't like that either. Tough. We need to pass it. We need to pass it quickly. And it will provide a number of things, including temporary protective status for Belarusians who are here. Again, the special envoy to coordinate efforts in support of freedom-loving Belarusians, and updates U.S. sanctions and reporting to Congress on Lukashenko's support for the war in Ukraine, as well as his despicable behavior. So that we'll be working on that. And but again, I can't thank you enough. All of us feel this way. I chair the Human Rights Committee of this Foreign Affairs Committee, and we watch everything that's going on in Belarus, and it is awful. And you are such a noble and patriotic leader, and for which we all have such deep respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Smith, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership on this issue over such a long period of time. And thank you to have you for joining us here today as well. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished witness before us today on this important topic. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is a national leader of Belarus and head of the United Transitional Cabinet. Thank you for being here today. Your full statement will be made part of the record, and I ask that you keep your verbal remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Ms. Tsikhanouskaya for her opening statement.
Dear Chairman Kane, Ranking Member Keating, honorable members of subcommittee. Let me express gratitude to the U.S. Congress and the American people for many years of the support of the democratic aspirations of the Belarusian people. I am confident that Belarus will become a truly independent, free country, a reliable partner, and a member of the European Union and transatlantic community. But to achieve this goal, we must dismantle the illegitimate regime of dictator Lukashenko, who, with Russia's help and under its control, has usurped power. In 2020, Belarusians made a clear choice in favor of democracy, freedom, and human rights. However, the dictator refused to step down and drowned the nation in terror. 60,000 were detained. Hundreds of thousands had to flee. Thousands of political prisoners were taken hostages, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate Ales Belyatsky, my colleague Maria Kolesnikova, presidential hopeful Viktor Babarika, activist Polina Shalenda-Panasiuk, journalist Igor Losik, and my husband Sergei Tsikhanouskaya, sentenced to 19 years. My children didn't see their daddy for 3.5 years, and since March this year, I have not heard anything from him, and I don't know if he is alive. People in prisons are tortured and kept incommunicado. More than 100 people are in critical condition and might not survive. The release of political prisoners is a matter of urgency. Lukashenko's regime became a threat to the entire Europe. It hijacked the Ryanair flight to kidnap a dissident journalist. It continues sending illegal migrants to the border with Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia. It dragged our country into Russia's aggression against Ukraine and continues to support the war with weapons, infrastructure, and training, airspace, and land. Dictator participated in the abduction of Ukrainian children from the occupied territories. For Putin's support, Lukashenko pays with our sovereignty. Russia is taking control of the Belarusian economy, national security, foreign affairs, and media. There is an ongoing Russian attack on Belarusian culture, language, and national identity. Russia expands its military presence in Belarus. Recently, it deployed nuclear weapons on our land. We support Ukraine's just war for its survival because the fates of our countries are intertwined. We fight against the same evil and for the same values. Without free Belarus, there will be no free Ukraine, and vice versa. We understand that changes in Belarus is our responsibility, but we can't do it alone. We need US support. We applaud the US State Department's unprecedented decision to launch strategic dialogue with Belarusian democratic forces. We call on the US to support our efforts to preserve independence and restore democracy in our nation. The appointment of the US Special Envoy should help build a coalition for independent democratic Belarus. We ask to recognize agreements signed by the dictator with Russia as void and impose new sanctions against Russia for its illegal attempts to subjugate Belarus. Belarus shouldn't become a consolation prize to Russia. Free Belarus will be the strongest sanction against Putin and will help Ukraine win this war. Therefore, supporting Free Belarus is not charity. It's your investment into the global peace and security. We call on you to provide material assistance to Belarusians fighting for freedom and democracy, to independent media and families of the repressed. Support those who live in exile and can't return home. I call on the US Congress to support the temporary protected status for Belarusian nationals in the US. Belarusians abroad are denied renewing their passports. In response, we prepare to issue a new Belarusian national passport, and we ask the Congress to endorse this project. We should increase pressure on the regime. Sanctions are not a silver bullet, but it is a way to weaken the regime, release people from prisons, and stop its involvement in the war. And we must end impunity. Let's bring Lukashenko and his cronies to account through international courts. The regime has a long record of crimes, including crimes against humanity, torture, killings, and abduction of Ukrainian children. All dictatorships fall, and Lukashenko's dictatorship will fall too. When you discuss an economic recovery plan for Ukraine and Moldova, please include Belarus as well. And finally, I call on the US Congress to support the newest edition of the Belarus Democracy, Sovereignty, and Human Rights Act. It will show U.S. leadership and commitment to the values we all stand for. So, dear friends, the path to freedom and democracy may be long and difficult, but this path is the only right one, and so let's walk this path together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the U.S. has not had a special envoy for Belarus since January 2022. This is unacceptable. Can you please describe how the appointment of a new special envoy would improve U.S. policy in dealing with Lukashenko and supporting the democratic forces?
I remember how the first special envoy was designated. It was Julia Fisher. She opened so much doors for us, democratic movement in the USA Congress and State Department and the White House. And special envoy is a bridge between our democratic forces and the USA, all the branches. So it will help us to explain situation in Belarus. It will help us to persuade government of the USA to study opportunity, to work out on the strategy on new Belarus. Because now we see there is no strategy towards Belarus about this future. Of course, we appreciate all the help and assistance and pressure on the regime and assistance to Belarusian people, but we need clearly understand what will be the future steps of the U.S. And that's why we need this person, first of all, to to be the best friend here in the U.S. and be best friends to Belarusian part, to be this, as I said, bridge. So of course it's very important for us, and I hope that new special envoy, hopefully it will be designated very soon, will also unite all the special envoys that have been designated by European countries. It's already an alliance of countries who designate special envoys who don't work with the pro-regime Belarus, but with democratic forces.
And you were in Washington this week for a so-called comprehensive strategic dialogue with the State Department. What results do you hope to achieve through the democratic forces meetings this week with the strategic dialogue?
Of course, we would like to have final joint communique statement with the main political messages in the support of democratic, sovereign and independent Belarus, acknowledgement of the United Transitional Cabinet and Coordination Council work, and welcoming elections to Coordination Council. Also, post-war security architecture and Belarus' essential role in it. And recognizing the need for the concerted pushback to Russia's illegal actions against Belarus. Non-recognition of Lukashenko's agreement with Russia after 2020. Welcoming the goal of Belarus to join European Union and transatlantic community. Commitment to support democratic movement. Continued pressure on the regime, including sanctions, and supporting accountability efforts.
You have gone on record stating that loopholes are weakening the sanctions imposed on Lukashenko and his regime. I would like to see more effective sanctions in place so we can hold this dictatorship accountable for its crimes. Can you please describe the loopholes that currently exist, and how can the U.S., the U.K., and the EU improve our sanctions for maximum impact?
No, the sanctions that exist now, sanctions against Lukashenko's regime, cannot be effective because of the loopholes that can be easily circumvented by Lukashenko's regime. Lukashenko uses Russia, and Russia uses Lukashenko's regime to circumvent these sanctions. Regime of Belarus opens daughter enterprises in Russia and continue to trade with the European Union. Trade with the European Union increased several times since the beginning of the war. And they buy goods from Europe to Russia and sell Belarusian goods as goods from other countries. For example, they put a label of Kyrgyzstan, for example, on Belarusian goods and sell it as Kyrgyzstan. But it's evident that it's circumventing of sanctions. So we need, first of all, have joint position on closing the loopholes, and it should be efforts of the USA together with European Union, Canada, and the UK. And also, please consider individual sanctions. You have already mentioned this, that judges, prosecutors, all those people who committed crimes against Belarusian people have to be put on sanction list. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Keating for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for being here and for everything you're doing. I'd just like to make sure there's a strong bipartisan support here for the appointment of a special envoy. We saw the work of former Ambassador Julie Fisher, who was terrific. We all really admired her work while she was ambassador. We admire the work of Peter Kaufman, that it continues going forward. But I think having this role filled would give more strength internationally to that position. So it's something we strongly endorse. I've known you now for a few years, and I just admire your courage beyond words. Sacrifice to your family, everything you've done. You said in your opening statement that you don't know whether your husband is even alive, and you haven't had contact for that period of time. At a time when democracy is being threatened, not just in Belarus, but around the world, including in the United States, this is a critical time that we look to leaders like yourself. Largely, the huge support you had from so many women in the country can be echoed around the world. But can you share with us, given all that sacrifice, why democracy to you is so important, not just in Belarus, but all over the world?
Your Representative Kittens, I think that you start to value democracy when you are deprived of it. And people who live in democracy, enjoy it every day, forget, how democracy is valuable. And that we are fighting for actually the rights and values that you have in your everyday life. For me, democracy is about responsibility of every person to participate in the life of your country, not just to live with your personal cozy lives, but to feel responsibility for bigger issues. And now, of course, for me, responsibility, or for me, democracy is about right of people to express their opinions. And so as we are lack of it, hundreds of people are in prisons at the moment. It's a couple of days ago in Belarus, about 200 searches happened. That we have coordination council as proto-parliament. We are building democratic institutions in exile at the moment, but we want to show and to study how democracy works. And people who are members of coordination council, they are sacrificing freedom of their relatives. Their relatives in Belarus have been detained. Their flats, apartments were ruined just because of these people are parts of democratic institution we are trying to build. And people ready to do this because we know how it's important to study democracy and to build democracy in Belarus. Many people are sacrificing in Belarus and in exile. So it's a big price. It's a big price, we are paying at the moment. So again, we can't do it alone. I really cherish democracy of the USA, and I'm absolutely sure that you feel this moral obligation, to help those who want to gain the same rights that you have.
Well, thank you. Coming from you in particular, given what you've gone through and continue to go through, that democracy is just not a privilege to be taken for granted, but a responsibility and a shared one.
Yep.
And very briefly, along those lines, There's some debate here in the U.S. now about funding Ukraine. How important is that to Belarus, but also to democracy in general?
No, I urge all the countries, and of course, powerful and significant USA, to help Ukraine with all the possible means. Because Ukrainians now are fighting not only for their lands, but they're fighting against dictatorship. We must remember that dictatorship is like cancer. You know, until it cuts to the last cell, it will spread further and further. So democratic countries have to help those who are on the front line of this fight. Believe us, I'm absolutely sure that Ukraine will win this war, but if they lose, it will be disaster not only for our region, not only for Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and so on and so forth, but also for all democratic countries. Democracy has to show its teeth, because dictators are learning very fast from each other. You know, they use the same tools, and we have to show that democracy also has tools to counter dictatorship, because they are dictators are crossing red line after red line, and if they see that democracy can't answer, you know, they go further and further, they become bolder. So Ukraine, I understand that under the victory of Ukraine influenced a lot situation in Belarus too, because both countries are facing the same enemy, imperialistic ambitions of Russia. And without free Ukraine, there will be no free Belarus. But also vice versa, we have to remember that without free independent Belarus, there will be constant threat to security of the whole region of Europe. So help Ukraine to win this war. I really believe that any possible assistance to Ukraine will not stop.
Thank you for your cautionary words about the spread of this when it's not extinguished in the first place, particularly as we look to China, Iran, North Korea, and other areas. So I yield back, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. I now recognize Congressman Heisinger from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get into my questions and statements, I do think it's important that the record reflect and clarify what Chairman Smith was saying about him being declared as public enemy #1. That is not unique. There's many despots and dictators around the world who have declared you public enemy #1. Why? Because of your work on making sure these types of voices are heard. And I want to say thank you to the chairman for this and for this hearing and for bringing light to this. Interestingly enough, I have a son who's studying in Spain right now, and he's on a break, and they're in Prague right now. I happened to be in Prague in January of 1989. I was caught up in pro-democracy, what turned into a riot, and was chased by riot police and nearly clubbed, and had dogs and water cannons chase me and my college friends as we were there. And my son now, who was there, was visiting the Museum of Communism earlier today. And we've been texting. I wish I could share some of the texts in our conversation, but it struck me. Yeah, as my trip, we went to Moscow and Leningrad, St. Petersburg, Warsaw, Prague, East Berlin at the time, Prague and Budapest. And my son in this generation doesn't know what had happened in the Cold War. And they also don't know necessarily the connectivity between what we are seeing now today with these people who are desperate to hold on to power and will do anything to stamp out the voices of freedom and liberty. So I want to say thank you for what you are doing and for those folks that are remaining behind, fighting back against this. I was able to leave Prague. I was able to come back home to the United States. Many cannot. They cannot flee that. And those are lessons that we cannot forget. And so, again, I just want to commend you for what you are doing in leading that and being a voice for freedom and liberty for the people of Belarus. one of those things that we've seen as sort of a marker of despotism and dictators is crackdowns on various groups, oftentimes on religious groups. And we're seeing this in Belarus right now. Is that not true? We're seeing the churches being cracked down on. I'd love for you to comment a little bit on that. There's reports that Belarus has detained, fined, imprisoned, and pushed out of their positions or forced into exile at least 60 religious leaders of the Belarusian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Greek Catholic, and various Protestant churches since the 2020 crackdown. Would you describe what's happening as also part of a crackdown on religious freedom in Belarus?
You know, in 2020, people of different layers of population, of different professions, were on the streets opposing fraudulent elections in Belarus. And among those, of course, there were a lot of people of religion, of different confessions. And of course, regime started to put revenge on religious institutions in our country. The problem is that all the Orthodox churches in Belarus belong to the state, and they can easily, close churches. And it's the way to blackmail religious people. Many priests are in jails, in Belarusian jails at the moment, and recognized as political prisoners. Many of them had to flee Belarus because of repressions, and now they serve in Lithuanian and Polish churches. They continue to do this. But of course, Belarusian churches also under repressions. They are made to keep silence. They are forbidden to pray for those who are in prisons, for families of political prisoners. They are forbidden to pray for future free Belarus without wars. So they're also under pressure, but I'm absolutely sure that when the window of opportunity comes to Belarus again, all those people will be in this pro-democratic movement.
And if you come, well, let's say when you come into power, and Lukashenko is no longer there, would you support religious freedom and the ability for these people to gather and worship as they see fit?
Absolutely. I fully welcome religious freedom in Belarus, and all the confessions should be presented in our country without any pressure. And among Belarusian society, there is absolute tolerance to people of all religions, and there will be full consensus among Belarusian people that people of all religions have to be presented in our country.
My time is expiring. I wish I had gone shorter on my story of my experiences that pale with anything that you have been going through. I wanted to explore a little more of how sort of hybrid or irregular uses of things like downing or grounding of an international airliner to get to an opposition journalist, or how migrants and refugees are being used really as weapons against surrounding countries. And I'll leave it up to the chairman if he is able to give you some time to comment on that. But I just want to say, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, right? Sorry, with a name like Heisinga, it's also difficult. I just want to again say thank you for your efforts, your bravery, your courage, and your voice that is here. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah,
That inquiry,
yeah,
please,
thank you,
Ms. Ann.
thank you. Now we are talking about crimes of Lukashenko's regime. He committed crimes against Belarusian people. First of all, we have to consider this. People are being tortured, people are being humiliated constantly in prisons. People in Belarus are kept in this atmosphere of tyranny on the daily basis. But also, regime started to put revenge on our neighboring countries. And this migration crisis that was orchestrated by the regime is revenge on Poland, Lithuania, Latvia for constant support of Belarusian democratic forces. And it will not stop, until we stop dictator. All these efforts to blackmail, to put pressure on our neighbors will continue. So we have to not to treat symptoms of this disease, that is dictatorship, but to treat the main problem. And let's return to hijacking of the airplane. This was act of terrorism from the side of the regime, and this case was investigated, but still no punishment came for this crime. And I think we should use all the possible international justice mechanism like ICC, ICJ, universal jurisdiction to bring Lukashenko and all those responsible to account. Please help us to endorse this special investigation, appeal to Karim Khan for him to pay attention to the issue of Belarusian regime crimes.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Heisinger, for bringing that important issues up. The chair now recognizes Mr. Amo from Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate your welcome and warm welcome to this committee and to the ranking member as well. And I'm pleased to join my first hearing hosted by the subcommittee on Europe. And I really just want to thank our witness for your remarkable strength, your perseverance under what I can't imagine to be the most intense of pressure, both in your own family unit, but also the family of Belarus collectively that requires real change. And I am so honored to be before you as you lead. It is important that I am here today in this first hearing because it's a topic that means so much to me, democracy. Democracy and the preservation of it. And so, it is clear that there is bipartisan support domestically for our commitment to democracy. And I appreciate those in Belarus who are demonstrating their strong desire and commitment to a democratic future. I especially want to recognize that women have played a leading role in Belarusian the democratic movement that has grown, and I am so glad to be adding my voice in my early weeks here in Congress. And I'm proud that Congress, that the last Congress passed several measures to affirm the support for the aspirations of the people of Belarus for democracy, for human rights, for the rule of law. The fulfillment of these aspirations is critical to ensuring the continued strength of Belarusian sovereignty and territorial integrity. I hope to build on that support in this Congress. And I'm also encouraged by those across the Biden administration who are supporting the democratic movement and holding accountable its anti-democratic leaders. The strategic dialogue provides a great opportunity, and that is one of the things that I wanted to ask about today. I wanted to get a sense from you about the role of the Belarusian private sector in the dialogue, and what role do you think they have in accelerating our pathway to change and making sure that the democratic opposition is able to ultimately lead?
Thank you for your question. I have to say, first of all, that since 2020, many Belarusian small businesses and entrepreneurs also were under repressions and had to flee Belarus. And now many businessmen are trying to reopen their businesses abroad just to work for democratic forces, to help democratic institutions and families of repressed, and to contribute into cultural projects of Belarus. And of course, we want to work with the US to help private businesses in Belarus to grow. And It's include getting advice from the U.S. experts and making plans based on what works well in the U.S. You know, Belarusians want to see the future after Lukashenko. You know, we want Belarusian people, Belarusian business to blossom at the moment, maybe in exile because it's difficult to stay loyal loyal to democratic aspirations and work in Lukashenko's Belarus now, but we want to develop private sector in exile at the moment, and we ask you to help those people, you know, to provide them with new connections with the businesses who maybe would like in future, after Belarus becomes democratic, to invest into our country. We have wonderful, hardworking people. We have wonderful geographic position, but we have poor management in our country. If give our people opportunity to work freely and to make the businesses freely, they could contribute so much in our economy. But we have to start to work now for future of Belarus. So we ask for your assistance in this direction as well.
Well, I appreciate that dignity of participating in the private sector and driving that innovation and growth is something that I hope is a value that we can help blossom. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Amo. I now recognize the Vice Chair of this committee, Congressman Self from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You say in your testimony that the Belarusian people do not want to be a Russian surrogate or Russified. I'm trying to gauge, because the United States doesn't have a very good record of the last 20 years working in different cultures, understanding different cultures. So I'm trying to gauge the support across the 9+ million people of Belarus. So what are the activities that you see inside your country? Are there underground resistance movements? Are there any active resistance movements? Talk to me about the 9 million people, not just the few in the democracy movement. What is the mood of your people?
I'm absolutely sure that most of Belarusian people are dreaming about democratic and free country. But people who are under repressions, you know, who are under threat of being prosecuted, you know, every day, can't be vocal. Just imagine, for speaking against regime, you can get 15, 20 years in jail. For supporting Ukraine, you can get 10, 15 years in jail. For donating 20 euros to the Ukrainian army, you get 6 years in jail. This is our reality. And of course, we want to save people because there will be a new window of opportunity for us. And we want people to be safe and secure for this moment. Of course, people are not just sitting and waiting when this window of opportunity comes. People are working and working underground, of course. People have to hide, you know, their aspirations. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Believe you me, we understand that the real target of the January 6th is the American people, so that you don't go to the street corner and make your views known. I want to talk about the enforcing the sanctions. How do you recommend the U.S. admin enforce the sanctions better? Because we are looking, in Congress, we are looking for ways, because this administration has allowed Iran, for instance, to sell at least $60 billion in oil. So how do we change the behavior of this administration to help you enforce the sanctions on Russia?
So, you know, there are still fields of Belarusian economy that can be under sanctions. It's woods, it's steel that are not under sanctions at the moment. And as I have said before, you know, we have to close loopholes, because trade with our neighbors, with the other foreign countries, is still continuing despite of sanctions. We have to understand that sanctions on Russia are mostly imposed on import, in Belarus on export. And Russian regime and Belarusian regime are using each other to circumvent these sanctions. Lukashenko's regime is selling Russian goods as if they are Belarusian because they're not under sanctions. And
So what would we do about that?
close
I'm
loop-
trying to understand how we change behavior, because that's our own problem in the U.S. How do we change behavior?
it's not about behavior, it's about instruments that allow to detain all those businesses, enterprises abroad that helps regimes to avoid, to circumvent sanctions. You know, I don't know, you have to launch special mechanism of sanction circumvention that will follow fulfillment of the sanctions. I know that in the USA you have secondary sanctions. Can you urge European Union, for example, to create the same mechanism?
Got it. We're trying to do that in relationship to Iran as well. So you're in Washington for the strategic dialogue with the State Department. So what do you expect to come out of that strategic dialogue?
So I have already listed, you know, what we are waiting for from this, but we need U.S. strategy for Belarus. We need to understand how the U.S. is perceiving situation in our country, that you will not allow, you'll help us not allow Belarus to be left as cancellation prize.
That's a great point. Let me interrupt you. I'm almost out of time to say we can't get a strategy for Ukraine out of the administration. I hope you have success with the administration. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Vice Chair Self. I now yield 5 minutes to Chairman Smith from New Jersey.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for the courtesy of allowing me to sit on your committee. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, let me just, one of my concerns is that the Putin-Lukashenko horrific war in Ukraine has diminished, however unwittingly, the focus on in the U.S. and the West on human rights in Ukraine being committed against, in Belarus being committed against people like your husband. We know that there's a lot of political prisoners who are arrested, then let out, so there's this reign of terror. A lot of the long stayers, like your husband, 19 years, continue, unfortunately, to be incarcerated. My hope is with the Belarus Democracy Act of 2023 that we will begin a pivot towards remembering, because it has become, unfortunately, and you know, war does crowd out other concerns, but it shouldn't. So we can get back to, and you mentioned the strategy, which I think is so extremely important. So the sooner we get that legislation passed and into law, the better. And I can assure you we will work overtime to make sure that that happens. And I thank the chairman for co-sponsoring and again, for holding this important pivot hearing with you, which is so extremely important, and the ranking member, of course. You know, twice this year, Lukashenko was met with Xi Jinping. He met with Xi Jinping again on Monday. They're talking Belt and Road, which would be an opportunity to get a great deal of funding from the communist dictatorship of Xi Jinping. And I'm very concerned, and I'm interested in hearing what you have to say on this. You know, Xi Jinping has perfected a lot of human rights modalities, including torture, which obviously Lukashenko knows a great deal about. But he also has excelled in co-opting and destroying the churches and the Uyghurs, and you know, he's committing genocide, as we all know, in Xinjiang. But he's also developed a surveillance capability that is second to none, often with the aid and support of American corporations like Fisher and others, which is outrageous. I'm wondering if you're concerned, or perhaps are looking at, and maybe part of the strategy you share with, or get out of the U.S. Department of State, is how Xi Jinping might be looking to convey that surveillance, which is ubiquitous throughout China, to Belarus, making it even harder for dissidents, democracy activists, and church people to speak out. Because everywhere you look, there is surveillance in China. And it's become, like I said, it is everywhere. So if you could speak to that. Also, the churches, what can we do to raise the issue of the churches and the people of faith, the pastors, the clergymen that are being incarcerated? Are there co-religionists speaking out? Is the Pope said enough? For example, on the Catholic side, as other Orthodox said enough, it seems, again, we get so distracted by what's happening in the Middle East, and we got to deal with that, of course, China, Taiwan, of course, Ukraine. I just had a hearing on the ongoing brutality in Nicaragua under Ortega, where he's holding priests, bishops, and many other people, including a bishop who got a very long 26-year prison sentence for what? Preaching the gospel. So if you could, on this idea of China's getting involved, also the pivot, which you are helping all of us to make sure that we do our part in a pivot back to Belarus democracy.
Thank you, Representative Smith, for your questions. First of all, I will respond on what can you do on the religious aspect. You know, we have tried a lot to attract attention of the Pope, you know, to the problem political prisoners. And we want Catholic churches to play part in release of our political prisoners. As I said, we have about 100 people who are in extremely poor physical state. People are dying there, people with cancer, diabetes, and we need humanitarian possibility to release at least these people without any conditions. So, and church, of course, can play here a huge role. So if you can appeal to the Rome, you know, urge them to start this negotiation about release of political prisoners without any conditions, we would really appreciate it. And as for Lukashenko's visits to China, of course, Lukashenko needs support. He has now only ally Putin, and he's trying to attract attention of China as well. But China, you know, they're very pragmatic. They're looking for responsible partners, and knowing that in Belarus there is times of turbulence, they don't want to invest in our country, and Lukashenko is visiting like China, I suppose, requesting for money, and you know, until there will be no normal situation in Belarus, China wouldn't invest in Belarus. But Lukashenko needs resources, you know, and that's why we have to push more to isolate Lukashenko more economically, to change his behavior, and to start release political prisoners and start negotiations with democratic forces.
Just real quick, we will do the letter, and we'll do it immediately to the Pope as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I now yield 5 minutes to Representative Titus from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much for being here. It's welcome back. It's nice to see you again. And I join the others in just commending your courage and your determination, especially against such great odds and not having seen your husband in such a long time. You are truly a heroic leader of this movement in Belarus, so thank you for doing that. Could you tell us a little bit more about the cabinet in exile and what how your government's structured and what you are doing exactly there to keep the movement alive, and maybe what we can do in addition to sanctions to help you strengthen that movement?
You know, I'm really proud of Belarusian people who, during these 3 years, are still managing to keep energy alive, you know, to continue our fight. We really feel responsibility for all those who are in prisons, and we feel responsibility for the future of our country. And of course, I realize how institutions are important. And we, since the beginning, started to build democratic institutions. Yes, they are in exile at the moment because it's impossible to do something visible inside Belarus. So since 2020, we have built a United Transitional Cabinet as proto-government, where representatives on different directions are working, and also Coordination Council as proto-parliament. I want to underline that the families of participants of Coordination Council are under repressions inside Belarus, but people continue to be in Coordination Council because they understand how it's important. Hopefully next year there will be new elections in Coordination Council, because we want our institutions to work in the most democratic way. We are actually studying how to live in a democracy, And I hope that it will be good alternative to illegitimate so-called Lukashenko's elections in local elections in Belarus. You know, maybe I want to underline once again how material assistance is important for democratic movement. To launch cultural initiatives to strengthen and keep our cultural identity, our language. To media. Media is crucial, countering Russian and Belarusian propaganda. Let's keep in mind that Russia puts billions of euros or dollars to Belarus to support propagandistic editions and channels in Belarus. And we, like media in exile, have to counter this huge propagandistic machine. We have to be creative, we have to be inventive, but maybe we are lack of enough resources, you know, to doing great things. Of course, there is urgency to support families of political prisoners and political prisoners who already like served their terms and also had to flee Belarus because repressions, even after that you served your terms, continuing, and people are released in awful physical and emotional state, and these people need rehabilitation. And we need support in organizing of this rehabilitation program for people to feel that they are not abandoned, you know, that they, you know, like sacrificed their freedom, their health, but they will have opportunity to rehabilitate themselves, you know, after.
How do you get information back into the country to keep the movement alive?
No, God bless internet, because now it's much more possibilities to communicate with people inside Belarus through different internet tools. So, for example, I myself every week have hours of conversation with Belarusians who from inside can call me and we can discuss anything. All the media have they like local journalists who provide them information. All the organizations, NGOs that have been ruined inside the country but managed to recover their activity in exile have people inside the country.
I know that IRI and NDI were pushed out of Belarus and had to kind of move their headquarters somewhere else and just kind of do forays into the country. This has been several years ago. I suspect that's gotten even harder.
Of course, it's harder. But, you know, people in Belarus also not giving up. You know, people create small communities. People are really afraid to do this, but they are doing because they know it's necessary. People still continue to communicate, you know, inside the country. Why repressions are continuing? Because regime knows as only they stop repressions, there will be again thousands, millions of people on the streets. So they want to control people through this constant fear. And small acts of sabotage still going on in Belarus, acts of disobedience. Our partisan movement is still there. They stopped Russian equipment going to Ukraine at the beginning of the war. In the middle, there were acts of sabotage. And I'm sure that when our country, our land will be used for attacking Ukraine again, our partisans will be there immediately. So society is boiling, you know, but, you know, there is no possibility to be vocal, but we have to save our people alive and free just for them to be active when the moment comes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now am going to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Keating, for a second round of questions for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that you know, journalists, news people, independent news people, people like Ihar Losik are imprisoned or silenced one way or the other, and there's reasons dictators do that, because they don't want the free flow of information about what's really going on that affects people's lives there to be known to people. I wonder, to the extent that the people of Belarus understand how they've been used, how they're in jeopardy as a stage of nuclear weapons for the Russians, how dangerous that is to them, for the military training that's going on, how dangerous that could be for them, given the Ukraine war that's there. I wonder if they understand in Belarus, just how it's being used. Just a couple of weeks ago, the report from Conflict Observatory showed with their studies that they detailed the 2,400 children that were being kidnapped from Ukrainian families, and that there's 13 facilities in Belarus that are housing them now. Do the people there understand the torture that's going on in Ukraine by the Russians? How much they understand the sexual assaults and the rapes, and do they know about Bucha and the mass graves that are there? Do they know about this child kidnapping that's occurred and how this is there? How is the news getting into there so the populace in Belarus can fully understand just the jeopardy they're being placed into themselves, as well as the way their freedoms are being taken away from them?
You know, I see that Belarusian people are looking for honest news. They not just blindly believe in propaganda TV. You know, they don't want to be brainwashed. So that's why people are watching alternative news from Belarusian free media. Of course, it's also dangerous. I have to remind you that all the alternative media in Belarus have been recognized as extremists. And if a person inside country following alternative news or subscribed on alternative free media, then can be detained for years for this act. But we know that interest in honest news is increasing, and of course people are watching also Ukrainian news. Of course people know everything. They can't be vocal about these atrocities. They can't say anything against the war in Ukraine because immediately they will be detained. It's like Stalin's time era now in our country. But why I said about support to media, because it's so crucial, you know, to tell truth about the reality, about deployment of nuclear weapon, how Russia wants to subjugate our country, how Russia wants to anchor their presence for years ahead with deployment of nuclear weapon, how Lukashenko is participating in the war, in abduction of Ukrainian children. It's our task to deliver all these messages inside the country. Of course, now internet is our main way of delivering these messages. YouTube, different social networks like Instagram, even TikTok. I know that you don't like it, but nevertheless, we want to appeal to every person, you know, inside the country. You know, who maybe somebody can be even for Lukashenko, for Russia, against the war. Nevertheless, we want them to know the truth or to watch alternative news and see what's reality. And what's disturbing me more is that people abroad, ordinary people, don't know the news, what's going on in Belarus in the moment. So that's why we urge Radio Free Europe here in the USA to open Belarusian service. Voice of America, yeah. Voice of America to open Belarusian service where they will broadcast in Belarusian language, but also on English, but about the news of Belarus. For maybe some people of America know where Belarus is situated, that we have border with Ukraine, that you know, we have a dictatorship in our country, that we like North Korea at the moment, just to learn more about our country. And of course, again, support our media. It's urgent to counter propaganda that that Russia contributes billions of euros to promote their messages and to brainwash people.
Great. Those are strong words when you say it's like Stalin's time in your country. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. And now I yield myself for up to 5 minutes for a second round of questions. How can the international community hold Lukashenko and his regime accountable for their crimes in Ukraine? Should the ICC extend the warrant it issued for the arrest of Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova for similar crimes to Lukashenko?
You know, since the beginning of our revolution, we are trying to bring Lukashenko's regime to accountability for his crimes. We try to do this because thousands of people went through tortures in prison, so it's crimes against humanity. No success at the moment. Hijacking of airplane, it's a threat to international security. The investigation was done, but we don't know what's the results, no punishment for this. Migration crisis, then participation in the war, now abduction of Ukrainian children. And this abduction of Ukrainian children is our chance to bring Lukashenko to accountability because for the same crime, Putin and Lvova Belova was brought to accountability and was given arrest warrant. While Lukashenko is not in the same row with them. We have tons of proofs of these crimes, tons of evidences that have been delivered to Karim Khan already, but still no special investigation was initiated. The question why? So if you can somehow help us to open this door and to encourage Karim Khan and ICC, you know, to start this investigation, we'll be really grateful because people have to feel that dictators will not feel impunity for their crimes.
That's why I brought that question up, and thank you for answering it in that way. In 1999, the Belarusian and Russian government signed an agreement creating a so-called union state of Russia and Belarus. Can you please describe how this entity actually subordinates Belarusian sovereignty to Russian control?
You know, hardly any person in Belarus will answer what this unity means in reality. Because what they're doing, you know, Lukashenko is Putin under the cover of this unity, nobody knows. You know, it's like a strong secret what's going on. But of course, Russia can use these signed documents as like reason, you know, to continue to subjugate Belarus. We see the process of Russification in our country. We see how Russia is trying to control our education, media, economy, military sphere, so maybe under the cover of this union state, you know, and Lukashenko, when he gave our land as launching pad for missiles in attacking Ukraine, he also said that, look, we are with Russia in this union, we have to help this country. But there is no profit for Belarus as well. It's just ways to deprive our country of independence and sovereignty. And of course, this agreement, this union should be dismantled as soon as Belarus becomes free and independent.
Thank you. I now yield up to 5 minutes for a second round of questions to Representative Titus.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. You know, when you first took up this cause after your husband had been imprisoned, Lukashenko said you were just a housewife and you couldn't possibly be president. Well, obviously, you've shown that's not the case. But I would ask you about the role of women in this opposition movement, because we find that women are not only usually the agents of change, but they also bear the heaviest burden with their families, with their husbands going to war. They're left with few resources. Could you talk about that a little bit, and both in your movement and in Belarus?
You know, our revolution is often called a revolution with women's face. And I now realize that maybe women are more effective on long distance. Now we see that our fight is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And women are really more effective and stable, I would say, in our fight. Maybe because we feel more a responsibility for the future of our country, because it's the future of our children as well. We are preparing this country for better life of our children and grandchildren. And of course, in future Belarus, there will be no even discussion about gender inequality, because our women proved that they can be leaders. Many women are the leaders of the most initiatives, political, cultural, media initiatives in our country. So we have proved that we are much stronger than we might seem sometimes. And let's see how many brave women are behind the bars at the moment. Let's recall how Maria Kolesnikova tore her passport to stay in the country. Polina Sharenda-Panasiuk, who is opposing this regime even behind behind the bars, and she's paying a high price for this. So. Yeah, you know, our women are strong, our women are powerful, but of course, you know, the unity of our movement of democratic forces consists of not only of women but also of men, and our task is to unite around our common goals, not around personalities about persons, but about our goals.
Thank you. Just changing the subject a little bit about the Ryanair flight that was grounded and to arrest a person that Lukashenko was opposed to. Can you talk a little bit about his use of transnational repression and if that's being effective, or you anticipate it increasing, or other authoritarian regimes are kind of copying that pattern of behavior?
As I said before, dictators are easily learn from each other. They are learning the tools how to suppress people, how to blackmail neighbors, how to keep democratic countries in stress, how to disperse attention. For example, you know, Ukraine was in focus, now Israel is under attack, and it's a task of dictators, you know, to disperse attention, not to be concentrated on one issue, and to exhaust democratic countries from, and not to support everybody systematically. And that's why, as I said also before, we don't have to treat symptoms of the disease under which name is tyranny, but to treat the problem itself. You know, if in Belarus we can support democratic forces years and years, we can impose new sanctions, but if there is loopholes, if this support is not enough to win dictator, so it might be endless fight. But we really want to return home. We want to defeat this regime and build normal, reliable, democratic country. And it's, as I said in my speech, your support to us is not charity. It's your investment into future security of the whole world. So help us, to help the world be safe.
That's true. We need a friend in that difficult neighborhood. So by your strengthening your democratic movement, that strengthens our position internationally too. So, well, thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the Vice Chair of this committee, Mr. Self, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the nuclear weapons. We've seen the statements by Putin. So forth, but do you, and I'm not sure anyone has actually confirmed the presence of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Have you seen any evidence that confirms their presence?
Actually not. We know information from open propagandistic resources. They say that the nuclear weapon is already in Belarus, but this uncertainty creates more questions. With this uncertainty, regimes keep neighbors and the world in stress. Is the weapon there? Not, we don't know. But what we know for sure is that with the deployment of nuclear weapon, the aim of this deployment is to keep Belarusian people under control, to anchor the presence of Russia in our country for many, many years ahead, and also to blackmail neighboring countries. So we don't know for sure. My answer is no.
I read one article that said that they were actually building a new base for it. Are you familiar with that base, and is that base been completed, even if we don't know the weapons have moved? And I'm not sure where it is. I can't tell you.
No, actually, we don't know. We have heard about this basement. In Belarus, we have so-called people's intelligence. It's ordinary people who give us information if they see something, is going on. But we haven't get any information about this basement or deployment of nuclear weapon. I really can't confirm, this.
Okay, thank you. I think that's instructive to me that it may be all talk and no action. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Self. I now yield up to 5 minutes to Mr. Wilson from South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I call you Madam President. I believe that you were rightfully elected, and we just so appreciate your courage, your husband's courage. We just hope the best for ultimately a free and democratic Belarus. I'm very grateful with my Democrat colleagues to be working with the Friends of Belarus caucus. Indeed, we look forward to freedom and democracy in Belarus. And again, the courage of yourself and your husband just is such an inspiration, and I've been happy to actually be with you in Vienna, to be here with you in Washington, and in my service. Everywhere I go, people are just so impressed by your personal commitment and courage. You're an inspiration, obviously, for the people of Belarus, and then, hey, ultimately an inspiration for the people of Russia itself, that they too, under the oppression of war criminal Putin, one day there will be a free and democratic Russia, which I've visited many times, and I have been so impressed, but so sad to see a great country held back and oppressed by a dictator. With that in mind, also I want to congratulate you. The BBC has recognized, as British Broadcasting Company, you as one of the top 100 women in the world. You're in the top Bloomberg 50. Additionally, the European Parliament, in 2020, you received the Sakharov Prize, one of the highest awards, which indicates, indeed, as we saw the Soviet Union liberated and sadly going backwards simultaneously, that's such a recognition. In 2022, the Charlemagne Prize, and then I was recently grateful to be with you here in Washington to receive the recognition with the National Endowment for Democracy. And so your leadership is just so inspiring for the people around the world, for the people of Belarus. With that in mind, sadly, when the war criminal Putin invaded Ukraine February 24, 2022, a large contingent of its forces staged an advance on Belarusian territory to invade from the north. And hey, I saw the consequence. I was at Bucha, Ukraine, where I saw the sight of where whole families had their hands tied behind their back, and then they were shot in the head and buried in shallow graves. These troops had come from the direction of Belarus. With that in mind, Lukashenko has also provided bases and logistical support, including ammunition supplies, to the murdering Russian military. What other help has or Lukashenko provided, and what can we do to deter this?
So till now, Lukashenko's regime providing Russia with the missiles, Belarusian missiles, tanks, military equipment. Also, Belarus modernizes military equipment and repairing damaged equipment. Also, they provide intelligence information for Russia. Also, Belarus provides facilities to train Russian soldiers on our land, and of course, the Convention of Sanctions we have discussed before, allowing Russia to buy stuff for the war and for military through Belarus. Also, Belarus, sometimes Russian missiles fly over Belarus territory, is like providing airspace for attacking Ukraine. Also, at the moment, it's up to 200 Wagner thugs stay on our territory, and up to 2,000 Belarusian soldiers. Also, so last attack from our country was in October 2022, but it doesn't mean that our country can be again used for attacking Ukraine. And Lukashenko will provide our territory for doing this.
Another atrocity is the kidnapping of children. The Nazis kidnapped children in Poland to Germanize. Now we have war criminal Putin kidnapping children. Are there any children that have been kidnapped from Ukraine currently in Belarus?
We have proofs about at least 2,000 children that have been kidnapped from occupied territories and brought to Belarus. And we have documents approving this, and that's why Lukashenko has to be given arrest warranty for these crimes, abduction of Ukrainian children. And I ask you to help us in launching special investigation on this crime of Lukashenko in ICC.
Again, thank you so much. And it's been such an honor to be with you in Vienna, Washington, Copenhagen. And then I'm so grateful for the support of the Republic of Lithuania. Gosh, they're there 110% of the time, because they have seen oppression in the past, and they want to see a liberated Belarus. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I now yield 5 minutes to Chairman Smith from New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, thank you for your courageous leadership, but it's not just that, it's selfless. In the entirety of this hearing today, not once did you mention that a kangaroo court in March convicted you of trying to influence or overthrow an election. It's called an election. And you were sentenced to 15 years by Lukashenko's dictatorship. You never even mentioned it. You know, I mean, that speaks so much about you and your courage. And all of us here on this panel on both sides of the aisle are deeply concerned about you and your well-being. And we know that, you know, increasingly Lukashenko is going after the diaspora, both in Europe as well as in the United States. Matter of fact, the European Council on Foreign Relations did a piece in January called "A Prison of the Mind: Lukashenko's Pursuit of Exiled Belarusians." And you know, we know that nobody does that better than people like Xi Jinping and others, he especially, trying to harass and do worse to the diaspora here and in Europe and around the world. And I just wonder if you might want to speak to this. I mean, another reason why TSP, Temporary Protected Status, TPS, is so important, but it's only a part of it. I think our FBI and others in Europe need to be, law enforcement, even more energized to ensure the protection of the Belarusian people who are out of the country, and you especially. I mean, you're an icon of freedom. You know, we got to, you know, let everyone know that in Lukashenko's dictatorship that we care deeply about you and are watching and hoping and praying that you remain completely safe in your very, very courageous work. So I maybe speak to the diaspora, your own bogus conviction by that court in March. And finally, in terms of visiting political prisoners, we always, you know, count on the ICRC and others to go. Apparently that hasn't been happening. And then you have the outrage where the Global Red Cross suspended the Belarusian chapter of the ICRC after its chief boasted of bringing in Ukrainian children. That came out just a couple days ago. I mean, that is outrageous for the ICRC to have facilitated and boasted about that kidnapping of Ukrainian children.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, since the beginning of detaining people in Belarus, we asked Red Cross, International Red Cross, to pay attention to this issue. We're absolutely sure that Red Cross will find opportunity to demand access to political prisoners, for them to see how people are being tortured inside our countries, inside our in Belarusian prisons. But no like results of this work. We have never heard about public demand of access to political prisoners. And Belarusian Red Cross is absolutely pro-regime institution, and the leader of Belarusian Red Cross went to Belarus to occupy territories, and he was participating in the abduction of Ukrainian children. And as far as I know, now ICRC stopped any relationship with Belarusian Red Cross and stopped financing of this organization because of they didn't agree to fire this leader of Belarusian Red Cross. But still, they need to, they have to continue their support to demand access to people People are really dying in prisons, and it's in their mandate, to interfere in such issues where people are abused, people are being tortured. And if you can help us, to ask them to do it publicly, not just to send letters under carpet, but to show publicly that they are interested, in helping our political prisoners. So we'd be really grateful for this.
Thank you, and we will follow up on that. And again, you still don't mention the fact that this dictatorship has convicted you and sentenced you to 15 years. Again, you're so selfless. It's so inspiring. Thank you.
With no further questions from the members, I want to thank our witness, Ms. Tsikhanouskaya, for your valuable testimony, and the members for their questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional written questions for you, and we ask that you respond to these promptly and in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.